We're going to continue with our final panel. So we'll bring back up Tony and Dave and Crystal, and we'll have a conversation about the future of networking and IES as a team. So come on up, guys. Oh, okay, great. Okay, sure. So I wanted to tell everybody a number of the speakers are going to be hanging out after this if you have follow-up questions or want to meet them. And there are demos and screens outside that have lots of technical information if you want to dive deep into one particular area. I know that Hughes and CenturyLink have brought a lot of materials and a lot of information for you out there as well. Okay, so let's get started. Crystal, welcome back to the stage. So here we are in really the first transition year of IES, and we've been talking about IES for a number of years. And I guess from your perspective, what are the biggest hurdles that agencies are facing in their transition to IES? And how do these challenges differ when migrating from legacy networks to an adaptive network?
Biggest transition, I think, is that biggest issue during transition is that most agencies are really they're very focused on understanding what they have now and making sure that they have that they are transitioning exactly to what they have now. And so that, you know, most of these companies are really trying to not do that in the future. So a lot of concern that we have about folks trying to go like for like and transition like for like. And so we're out talking to people a lot about modernization. You know, there's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, between the CIOs and the CISOs and the folks on the ground who really have been able to, you know, have and hold their lines for a long time. And trying to get as much education out there as we can about the kinds of capabilities that this new technology offers. And I think, you know, just from what you heard today, I know that it's obvious now why GSA is getting out of this business of all of these, you know, changing lines and adding lines and deleting lines. So the kinds of things that you can get when, you know, Nick talked about the performance management dashboards, and Sean talked about the zero touch provisioning. It's, I mean, just amazing stuff. What that kind of, you know, that brings you. But it's a change, and it's a culture change, I think, for a lot of these CIO shops and these telecom shops in the CIO organizations.
And so there's a risk in many ways of missing the opportunity that's provided with the transformation, right? That if you're just going like to like, you may miss some of the opportunities to change services or change outcomes. So but if agencies like their current providers and their setup, can they exchange like for like from networks to EIS? Is it still the same, or should they be looking at wholesale transformation at this point?
Well, and that's really one of the reasons we're trying to push the statements of objectives. Because that, you know, if you're focused on the outcome instead of the how you do it, then you're going to be a lot more successful in the end. And it may allow, you know, some companies to work with these agencies to figure out, okay, let's get you moved over now, and then over time we'll help you modernize. So hopefully that is the kind of conversations that providers are having with these agencies.
And what support is GSA providing for those conversations, or just for thinking about this?
Yeah, so we're out talking at the highest levels to a lot of the CIOs. We've got our contract. We've had conversations with our contractor about really focusing these folks on modernization and modernizing their networks. And our, you know, internally, we've got, you know, agency contacts, an agency lead for every agency that can have those conversations with them.
Okay. Dave, so as one of the awardees of EIS contract, what do you see as the most exciting opportunity for agencies as it pertains to EIS?
Great question. I think, you know, we talk about today in modernization, transformation. As we watched, and Tony took us down the history lesson of what this contract form used to be and all the different scenarios that existed. What exists today is the ability to really make an impact for our country and how people connect to our government using today's technologies today. Sometimes we gap a little bit and we use yesterday's technologies today in our marketplace. And EIS really sets the table both from a WAN perspective, from a cyber perspective, from a mobility perspective. It has all of the components that agencies need to make an impact. And I was talking with Margie Graves the other day, and she said, the guy, the farmer in a tractor is totally connected until he turns back and he's got to use paper forms to interact with the government. And we have the opportunity now to really change that interaction between whether you're a farmer that's connecting to USDA for grant money and to log information, or we're protecting the food supply, or we're keeping planes safe. We have the opportunity right now to make a difference with technology.
Yeah, and that's the farmer example is an example that the administration keeps using, as the farmers now sit in their vehicles, their combines, they're totally connected, and many of them are financially trading options while they're, and pretty soon their machines are going to be, robotic, but then they come to the government and it's back to the forms, back to the perceiving of a farmer in the old paradigm, right?
Probably the other thing I would add to that question too is the folks at the executive branch, at OMB, at GSA, are looking with vision down the path of what this could have been and have built the contract to be able to do these things. It's really an exciting time to be part of the marketplace.
Great. So it's a robust contract. You've got a wide variety of products and services that are on it. And that can be overwhelming for some agencies as they think about this in the old paradigm and start thinking about new options. So how do you recommend the agencies navigate to the right products and solutions for transforming their agency? Tony, you want to start with that?
Well, it used to be easy. It used to be all voice all the time. And then over time, data took over the overwhelming percentage of the usage on the network. And there are certain requirements that certain agencies that have a large outreach or a need to have constituents call in, like the 800 service networks of the IRS and the Social Security Administration. Those are the two large ones, but and others. And those procurements have tended to become separate fair opportunities under the previous contracts. That probably continues to need to happen because certain service providers among the roster of EIS providers are probably better suited to that than others. There's also in-agency expertise to some of these different kinds of networks. So I think the agency needs to look within itself and realize that buying certain things on a component kind of basis is a good strategy, and in other ways, converge networks where you possibly can. I remember it used to be that we would buy the agencies were talking about convergence of data and voice networks, and then the voice people in the agency were ready for their fair opportunity before the data people were. So they'd send out a voice RFP. And then the data guys would do their data fair opportunity and award to a different vendor. So the voice data convergence never happened because the access lines were provided by different providers. So the concerns and the challenges are many. And Dave and I were talking, these fair opportunities, when they come out, every one of them is going to be different. And as each agency is different, their missions are different, so you're not going to see a cookie cutter approach. The only thing I can say is this whole like for like thing is, if you go like for like, you're going to at some point have budget pressures that you can't solve, or unhappy customers, or both.
Right. And maybe a greater risk, in the end, right?
Well, who's buying the same kind of PC in an agency that they bought 10 years ago?
Sure. Dave, what's your recommendation to agencies as they try to navigate?
Sure, I'll build on Tony's comments. I think each agency is unique and it has a history and a culture of what they've traversed over time. And to build on what Crystal said when she was talking earlier today, understanding from where you come from is really important. So what is deployed? What technologies have been used? Make sure that we've got that good foundation of a baseline in order to build from, to launch from, because that foundation is the strength from which any new technology would be introduced. And so I think getting an agency to understand that And GSA's been instrumental in that, in working with those agencies to be able to move then. And one agency might need to work a little bit tighter on cyber. Another agency might be ready for something like what we talked about today immediately to go. I think the opportunity that EIS again exists is, sure, you can do a like for like and you can see a cost savings, but it's not going to improve the interaction with the government, because it's going to be the same technologies that have existed. And so today's really about how do we launch into that next phase, and it's going to be different for each agency. So I really like the SUE environment much better, because that allows us to, as technology experts, be able to bring that expertise to the marketplace instead of kind of being told which steps we have to make. Let us make good business decisions, technology decisions, in order to reach what the agency's goals are.
And that brings out another point, that the fair opportunities of the past, for the most part, dictated the technology. Here's the look of the network that we want you to go out and build for us. Tell us how you're going to do that, and give us your lower bottom right-hand corner price. And in the new world, it's best to, and I'm going to oversimplify this probably a great deal, but tell us where your locations are. Tell us where you need to be connected. Tell us what your requirements are, your bandwidth requirements, your SLAs. And then let industry design the network. Don't design it for us. Let us put a solution together, and you evaluate what works best for you. And that dovetails along the statement of objectives kind of approach that we've been at this a long time, and I dare say this combination, this very powerful combination between the leading broadband provider of managed broadband services and the power and state-of-the-art network that CenturyLink from the level 3 and combined CenturyLink combination is probably a fairly unique offer here.
So what Tony said is actually really important and interesting to me, because we talked about these performance management dashboards. I mean, you've got telecom shops in these big CIO organizations and these agencies who do that now. That's their job. They do their own dashboards, right? They monitor those networks, right? So to give up and to cede that to industry is very tough for people. So it's going to take a lot of conversation and a lot of helping folks understand what kind of capabilities are out there.
So Tony, of the current agencies that are using broadband services, what lessons can we learn from their experience?
Well, that's a great question. We currently have, as the result of a fair opportunity that the Department of Interior conducted, that we responded to with, at the time, Level 3 and Dave's team. Department of Interior was very forward-thinking. They were looking forward to this for some time and wanted to acquire these services through networks. They got it. They saw it. And we won the fair opportunity. We've been implementing those services today. And I was conducting an interview with the head of their network operations with, oddly enough, a reporter from your organization, Tim. And so she asked me, well, what does Hughes do for this? I said, well, we're doing this broadband connection, and we're differentiating what the agency had beforehand, which were these dedicated access lines and MPLS circuits. And I said, basically, we're giving them twice the bandwidth for half the price. And my customer interrupted me and said, Tony, a third of the price. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee that every time, but the fact of the matter is that we were taking these people and replacing their T1 circuits at their field locations with a 10 by 25 cable circuit, a 25 megabit, a 3 by 25 satellite connection, because if you might think about the National Park Service, there wasn't a whole lot of cable connecting national parks, but we certainly could provide satellite capability, or DSL or whatever, and we brought those together. And think about every one of these tables being a Department of Interior, or we also do this for Department of Agriculture, every one of these tables being a site. And we were providing cable here and satellite there and DSL there and another different cable company in the back of the room. into a single offering, multi-transport, and they were getting this great new gain in bandwidth and this huge reduction in price. And that's the power of this offering. And you got two agencies with the USDA and Department of Interior that have experienced that already.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for consumers to achieve that point, right? Where I don't know necessarily whether I have DSL or Ethernet or some combination now of what I'm getting in my home, but it's all converged to the point where all I expect is really, really good service, and I expect it to be pretty cheap, right? So that's where we are in terms of enterprises overall, and the federal government's just a little late and of massive scale, right? So it's kind of harder for them to achieve that.
It was a fair thing to observe it being late, because when we first started talking to customers about it, we were doing this, relaying this capability to the commercial side of our marketplace. And I successfully convinced Nick to not use the term store in his slides, and rather branch and field location. And he said, Sean's using branch. I said, branch is okay. But the idea of getting this kind of service for the government in the early stages of this, it was like, well, this is the internet, right? Yep, can't do the internet, we're federal government. And that partnership that was described with Fortinet has suddenly made this more secure. And of course, working with the security capabilities of secure network capabilities of CenturyLink just sort of multiplies that. So it was an unfair characterization to say that the government was slow at this. First of all, it wasn't on the network's contract, managed broadband, and certainly SD-WAN wasn't. But we've evolved. This capability is much more secure, much more ready for government work.
So I'll add on to that. I think Tony's the government's perception of those first interactions spot on, right? And then there was another interaction, and it was more to what Sean was talking about today. And all of a sudden, there's flexibility in the network. Because when we talk about the network of old, it was a noun, it was hard, it was here to there, it was connections, there was speeds and feeds, and everybody could draw a picture of it. Well, today's network is a verb. It's an action, right? And so somebody does something and launches an application or moves an application we talked about today, and all of a sudden network flows are totally different. This network that we're talking about using this technology is able to handle that in fractions of the time it would have taken us to recover or put back to the way it was in the old noun world. In the verb world, the network is able to absorb and react and change on the fly. That's what these technologies allow us to do.
That's great. So Crystal, transition assistance is a prime focus since the original EIS solicitation. So what have you seen from the agency plans, and what is everyone getting right? What are the common issues that are cropping up?
As agencies start to transition, what a lot of them are getting right is that they're understanding the capability, I think, in the EIS contract. One of the things that we've been going around saying is, is that there's so much capability in this contract that you can, if you do it carefully, and you're a large agency, and you're one that spends a whole lot on telecom, the fees in the EIS contract are capped. So you could conceivably get to that cap and then buy all your cloud for free, because you can buy cloud through this contract, right? So there's a lot. We're recommending those kinds of strategies for people, depending on what their needs are. And everybody's in a different place. I think the smaller agencies are still struggling a little bit. They're trying to figure out which way they're going to go. We've heard one of the interesting problems that we heard crop up was this idea of multi-site location. So you've got these federal buildings in cities, and you've got multiple tenants in those federal buildings. And if everybody, so now we're trying to figure out, okay, if everybody's buying different providers, how are you going to sync up once you get everybody into that federal building, right? How's that going to work? So we're looking at that as well. There's so it's complex, certainly, but I think what people are getting right is the idea that modernization is not really an option anymore, and they're just trying to figure out, okay, I've got a time frame. How do I get this done in this time frame, and how do I make it so that I'm not locked in? It's a long contract. How do I make sure I'm not locked into a single technology, and that I can modernize over time?
Can you talk a little bit more about small agencies? You've talked about mentioned a couple times. What is it that they want, and what are they asking you for in terms of of clarity around what they can do with it? I mean, just to let the room sort of into your thinking about that.
Yeah. So in the past, GSA really just took care of everything for them, and they didn't have to think about it. They didn't have to touch it. They just called us, and we took care of everything. We dealt directly with the provider. We had the provider pay us, and we just billed the agency. So we're not able to really do that anymore, and so they're fairly lost. So that's why we're paying special attention to them. We're trying to put together a strategy that will help them stand up their contracts, where we are doing a lot of that upfront work for them, and doing a lot of getting everything in place and working with them to get everything in place, and then handing the management of that back over.
So how far along would you say agencies are in developing the fully staffed team of transition managers, and to what extent are suppliers able to help fill the gap for that?
Most of them have transition managers, and so that's a good person to connect with. In fact, they're figuring out in their solicitations, and planning out how they're going to move forward. And they really, the EIS was awarded before the IT modernization report came out, before the PMA, the latest PMA with all the new CAP goals came out. So some of them are feeling like, oh, I'm now I need to shift, right? They were just moving along, planning like for like. And so some of them at this point are feeling like, oh, I'm going to need to shift now and really focus on modernization. So they're pulling back and trying to understand what that means and how they're going to fit that in.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about transition a little bit. As agencies transition from the old state to the new state, what metrics are being used during and after the transition process to measure agency success? Or what metrics would you say they should be focused on? I mean, Tony or Dave, do you want to take a shot?
Well, my metrics would be how many of them convert to the CenturyLink Hughes team.
Got it. So, and
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah,
That's
right.
my answer.
That's great.
Yeah, to build on Tony again, I agree with that. I think what we're seeking from an industry standpoint right now is we're a little bit behind where we thought we were going to be, and so that's an easy metric to look at, right? Or the fair ops out, because there's a lot of work to do post award to make a transformation occur, make a modernization occur, and so I think again, depending on what technologies you're using, what agencies, what you're trying to do first, what's on your roadmap. All of those things are gonna be unique. I think the thing that strikes me, and I've said a couple times today, and I'm a fan of GSA and what GSA has done, but I think we all acknowledge we're a little bit behind where we thought we were going to be. To do modernization, to do transformation, I really believe that we need to be looking at this looming due date that's applying a lot of pressure. And when pressure gets applied, sometimes you take the easy way. And that's like for like. It doesn't get all the things we've been talking about today. So I'd really like to see GSA examine what they've got out there. They're able to see what the agencies are doing with OMB, to see where they are in their plans, to allow us some more runway, because we thought 2 years ago by 2020 it would be enough runway. Well, halfway through 18, it's getting a little tight at this point around the collar to be able to pull something like this off. So let's not shortcut our way to what success could be on EIS, and I think probably industry would feel a lot better if we saw some of that pressure relieved on those due dates.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just address that time frame that, I think at some point we were thinking, oh, well, maybe all options are on the table, but I'll tell you what option is not on the table. The option that's not on the table is not modernizing and just extending your old contracts for a while. So
Good.
yeah. So, we'd like to hear from agencies who really feel like they're, like they really want to modernize and they just don't have enough time. So.
Right, you want the pressure, but you don't want it to lead to the status quo, just extending.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we had some issues with that in the last transition to the networks contract. So we want to make sure that if we're going to consider any kind of extending of time, that people are really focused on getting into a modern network environment.
Tony and Dave, can you talk a little bit about the last transition on the networks contract? What lessons did you take away from that? If we're kind of walking into a new scenario where we're getting, everyone agrees we're getting constrained on time here, how do we avoid how would you recommend agencies not make the same mistakes?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so look, I think agencies last time moved very quickly. And we were coming from an environment where there were many, many vehicles and programs and contractors. If you go back and look at the amount of contracts we were managing, we probably had 8 or 9 with the same technology on it that all had a different price point, that all had a different CLIN. All of that took an incredible amount of energy. And so I think we saw agencies move fairly quickly last time on Networks Universal. And then a variety of transformational carriers got involved in one enterprise, but Universal had already left months and months prior. So I think the biggest thing I saw this time was GSA's ability to pull all of that together to create a very unique playing field to what agencies want. They can get access to a variety of different things all at the same time this go round. And so I think it's really about the vehicle and how the vehicle was constructed.
Tony, you have anything?
My experience really was more from the FTS 2001 period where I was at MCI. And Fair Opportunity was done in 8 months across the board. It was an extraordinary process, not quite as complicated as it became during networks and will likely be for EIS. But times were simpler then. The services set was a much smaller set. Many decisions were made based on oral presentations, and it was a lot of fun. Made more complicated in that period of time was the fact that the service provider that had 70% of the network did not win FTS 2001, so 70% of the agencies had to find a new home. So that made it
for like situation.
in a largely a like-for-like situation. So this one's going to be more interesting. I was explaining, in attendance in the rear of the room is our Senior Vice President for Enterprise Services, Dan Rasmussen. If you can raise your hand, Dan. And if any of you want to talk to him about how much you like me, to him after the event, you're certainly welcome to do so. But I was telling him, and this ended up raising my quota, but I was telling him that on your enterprise side, I mean, just think about how excited Dave and I are for this opportunity and the CenturyLink and Hughes team in the room. If our enterprise business were to somehow have a situation or a condition thrust upon them that all the prospects in our large enterprise business had to conduct a competition of their networks over the next 12 to 15 months, what a windfall that would be of opportunity. It's exactly what we have here. So it is complex. It's not to be shortchanged. It's not to be taken lightly. Part of the reason we're here is for the educational purpose, of course. It's not lost on us, but how exciting is this for low market share service providers like us on the grand scheme of things to be willing to make these offers to agencies who probably need the kind of services offered this next round because of the bandwidth demands, because of the cost pressures and so forth. This is an extraordinary time. So this will be probably the most interesting transition of them all.
We'll quote you on that. Tony Bardo predicts that. And this MCI company that you mentioned, just for people that don't know, that was a small startup out in Reston that you worked with at MCI?
It was a small startup that started as Microwave Communications Inc. and hardly
Is
anybody
that what it
remembers
stands
those.
for? I never knew that.
There was also money coming in.
There's many,
So it was-
many of MCI.
Eventually it became that.
Yeah.
That's great. Crystal, back to you. Just back to the question of metrics. Are you seeing or encouraging different types of metrics or standard metrics that people should be using as they choose different paths in this?
Yeah, I think that a lot of agencies will be really interested in some of the security metrics, and part of what the IT modernization report really recommends is starting to push that security down to the data layer. It'll be interesting to see how this all comes out and connects. Other than that, though, we really do think that that industry has really good offerings in terms of reporting, and I know that there are CIOs out there that want one belly button to touch, and they just want all their reports coming in. And so, if providers have offerings on those performance metrics now, I think that we're encouraging folks to go with the commercial solutions, so that it's easier for industry, it's easier for government, and everybody will have their own little individual tweak to that, because every agency is unique. And so we'll, you'll probably see like an add-on here, an add-on there, but and that's fine. But we're really encouraging folks to go with commercial solutions on that.
And we'll take you to questions. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll ask one more question. If you raise your hand, we'll come around to you next. Crystal, what can industry do better? A number of industry people in the room. Just what do you recommend that industry does to help with this?
I think the GSA event on the 24th is going to have is going to be a great opportunity for these providers to get out there and really educate agencies. We're going to have, we've got a number of agencies already signed up to come hear what kind of capabilities are on this contract and hear the kind of performance improvements and cost savings they can get from it. After that point, really no excuse. We need to get out, educate these folks, make sure that even the front line and the folks working on the ground in the telecom organizations really understand what they can get from this. They understand how their job will change and what they will do differently tomorrow. That's always a big sort of fear barrier for people, I think, is that they don't, if all this new technology comes in, they're very nervous about, well, what am I going to do tomorrow if the provider is doing my job now. So we have to help them understand that. We have to help them understand why this is so much better for the enterprise. And so a lot of education and then really helping them quickly get their solicitations out. GSA is now conducting a number of, we're refining this methodology around SLAMs to go into an agency, sit with our transition assistance contractor, our GSA folks and the agency folks, and then just bang out that solicitation and get it done. But having industry talk with these folks and do some education is really helpful before that happens.
All right. Questions? Raise your hand. Here's one over here.
Hi, Simon Chen from CenturyLink. So, Crystal, I have a question. Actually, I have two questions. Agency hate, the risk of transition, right? So, what are the incentives for making agency to do the transformation instead of like transition, right? My second question about, I think you kind of touched it, but on the DHS take with the SD-WAN strategy. When we talk to the agency, a lot of times, the enterprise or the commercial world, they're so ready for SD-WAN, right? But a lot of government agencies, they continue to use the excuse of the TIC mandate, like you kind of touched on that, right? The TIC has got a very strict rule about, going through all the internet traffic going through the Einstein examination, right? So how do we convey to the agency and how do we educate them that, hey, this is coming, we need to go? And is there any plan for the DHS to change the mandate?
So you should take a look at the report, the modernization report, because it does talk about it in there. And I think that's softening. That requirement is probably going to be softening. So it can be transformational. That's going to be transformational when that's loosened up. I agree. So making sure agencies have seen that report and understand what it calls for, I think is going to be really helpful in pushing that. And I think there's some of that in the President's management agenda as well. And then first question was, again,
The incentive.
Yeah, what are the incentives?
oh yeah. So what's the agency incentive? What's the agency incentive to transition? So I think, and I mentioned this earlier. I think it's really important that we go out and start to tell stories of what that really means for that agency, right? So right now this agency has Agency X has a huge call center, physical call center in Atlanta, let's say. And if they can get all of those folks to work from home, that's a huge savings for them. And this is possible today, right? Because they can take all of those calls through their computer. Their manager can see that they're online. They can see the whole network. They can see the calls coming in. They can see, I'm stuck on, this agent over here is stuck on this call. You can, it's just all right there. And so there really shouldn't be any fear of that, and we should help agencies understand, okay, what does this really mean for my business? Because we can talk, network all day, and SD-WAN all day, and right, but to help them really help those business program leads understand, okay, this is what it's going to mean for my business is what I try to do when I go out and talk to folks.
Next question in the audience, sir.
Yes, hello. Another question for Crystal. I believe you mentioned that there's a list of EIS contacts for each of the agencies. Mm-hmm. Is this available for industry, the list of the contacts for each of the agencies?
That we should be able to make available, yes.
Okay.
Well, I'll try to get all this for you at least by the 24th when we have our event.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay.
Any other questions? A few hands. Okay, I'll take I think this is probably our last question. Well, let me ask Crystal, I know you're kind of on the spot with multiple questions here, but with IT modernization coming through and the President's management agenda at the same time that EIS is sort of, already packaged, how has that changed GSA's point of view? Are there different things that are getting prioritized coming out of that? You mentioned that the OMB memo had mentioned a number of times the EIS contract. How is that changing things in the EIS world from your perspective?
A lot of eyes on EIS and a lot of leadership attention on EIS. So all the way up to the administrator at GSA, we're providing, and the Federal Acquisition Service Commissioner, we're providing updates all the time. A lot of interest.
But are there areas of EIS that are more priority now than, say, 6 or 12 months ago because of the because of the new administration's agenda?
I don't know that there's necessarily different areas that are more important. We're really focusing on transition assistance, solicitations right now. That's sort of the next thing out of the gate. But really asking folks to think through modernizing at the same time, and we're finding that they are. I was out talking to DHS, VA, DoD, all of them really interested in this and trying to understand how this is gonna help their service to the citizen and help the warfighter. So.
And so we'll just go down, the last question is just as you each look over the next 6 to 12 months, what are you preparing to do, and from the industry side, what are you preparing to do to help people or to be a resource for government? And then Crystal, you can tell us sort of what we can expect in terms of milestones from your perspective. So Dave?
Yeah, so we're looking forward to this next phase, right? I think everybody, industry, all our business partners, we've been waiting for it. So I'm hopeful that I don't have to cancel the holidays because all of them don't come out on the same day. So I would like to see some type of transition. And I think that the government would receive the benefit of the A team on everything versus the A team on the first thing or the more complex thing. And so a balance of what that it's going to be as it begins to come out from the agencies is going to be really critical to our ability to reply and to be able to build solutions. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for in the next kind of phase.
There's a lot to do. There's the local services contracts are also being recompeted, consolidated under EIS. At the same time, you've got these quote unquote, the term's not used much anymore, long distance networks that have to be recompeted. All at the same time, as I mentioned before, it's going to be the most interesting transition period ever in the history of this program. Agency's going to be pulled in a lot of directions. There's more vendors to talk to, an unprecedented amount of vendors. That's a good thing, but there's also time. It's time to set aside to meet with the vendors, to learn what they have to do, what priorities and what areas of the country for local services contracts, which ones are coming up sooner than later. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a burden for the agencies. We realize that, and everyone here is right. There's an educational aspect that needs to go on. We need to be mindful of your time, but also we want to be urgent about the need to get to talk to you and have you understand these new capabilities. I don't think anybody wants to go backwards. I don't think anybody wants to stay the same, but there are pressures. So it's going to be something where the expertise of the people trying to do business with the agencies, and the more they know about them, the better. Our account teams have to know what these agencies do and what they need. And the executives in charge of procuring these services have to have vision, latitude. Their contracting officers have to have some room to breathe, room to be creative and innovative, and not do business as usual.
Crystal?
No, I think that's right. I think that's where GSA has some work to do, is really on the contracting side. We want to be known as the premier acquisition organization, and so we need to get out and really help folks across government understand how to bid innovation, how to evaluate innovation, and how they can do it in a way that complies with all the regulations they need to comply with, and just be creative. Most of these folks got trained, got handed the FAR, and said go for it, right? So we need to help them understand how they can be creative and really match the acquisition to the needs of the agency and where the program folks want to go with it.
That's great.
Tim, if I could add, we gave you a lot of information today, and if you think that maybe you might have some more minutes to drill down on some topics, there are, as Tim mentioned before, these 3 stations out in the reception area. We're here. We bought the room for a while, so please feel free to meet some of the subject matter experts we've got in the back. And again, thank you for coming.
Well, thanks so much to you guys. I want to thank Crystal, Tony, and Dave for joining us today. It's been a great day talking about the evolution in telecommunications services. I'd like to thank CenturyLink and Hughes for pulling together this event and the great conversations we had. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. So Tony said you're welcome to hang out. We've got the room for a while. I also wanted you to know that we are going to send out the link, and we'd appreciate you passing any resources along to your colleagues as well. And as Tony said, we've got demos out in the lobby that you should hang out and check out as well. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.